we apply the same kind of discipline with working out that we do with food, we actually end up rewarding ourselves with food for working out. So, and if we push through our hunger often, as we think about pushing through a workout, we rebound eating more because you can't push through actual hunger. If your body's malnourished, you're gonna end up finding food.
You know, battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. You bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on our beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster. But for those insatiable, this is your prime time to thrive. Here's to saying yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your host, Ali Shapiro, who is dedicated to pioneering a saner and more empowering approach to health and weight loss.
Welcome to episode 98 of the Insatiable Podcast, Workout versus Food Willpower. Most people think they aren't reaching their health goals because of a lack of willpower. In this episode, I dispel this myth and discuss the different types of discipline required to be consistent with working out versus food, the importance of not pushing through your physical hunger and how that backfires, and how to start to build the discipline required to understand your makes no sense eating. Enjoy today's episode, and I'll see you on the flip side. Welcome to episode 98 of the Insatiable Podcast, Workout versus Food Willpower. I can't believe we're on episode 98. I've almost been podcasting for 2 years. It'll be 2 years officially in January. Kind of wild. I have learned so much. My ideas have shifted and changed thanks to your feedback, thanks to the people that we've had on the podcast. It's kind of like accelerating your education when you just talk to different people who have different areas of expertise on the regular. So we have a special episode 100 coming up. So if you're a regular listener, or if you're just new to the podcast, definitely check that out. I think you'll like what I've got planned for episode 100. And before we get to today's episode, I just want to remind you guys about leaving reviews for the show. It really, really helps me out a lot. I know I choose to do the podcast, and it's quite a lot of work behind the scenes here. And so to make it worthwhile and valuable, I need more people to find out about the show. So if you can leave a review, that really helps people find the show more. I don't quite understand iTunes algorithms, but I do know that the more reviews you have, the more likely the show comes up. And given that those of you who listen regularly, or even if you listen to a couple episodes, you know we're taking a very different route to health and wellness here. So different that even my clients often have trouble describing the transformation that they've occurred, because it just fits outside the calories in, calories out. It's all about willpower and discipline, wanting it bad enough narrative, which we're going to talk about today and poke some holes through. But if you can leave a review, it really helps. I want to share a recent one by C. Cordova, who gave it 5 stars and said, "This podcast goes deep." She says, I find so much of the information available in the quote wellness space as superficial, basic, and shallow. So-called quote experts market quick diet fixes and sell 7 steps to fill in the blank with whatever outcome sounds best at the time. Programs may have good intentions, but don't truly help anyone understand what being well actually means. Ali and her guests help listeners consider what well means on an individual level, and then consider what needs to change in order to become truly well. Highly recommend. So thank you, C. Cordova. That is what we are aiming to do, is dispel so much of the myths going out there so that you can make actionable change and actually feel invigorated by your wellness quest and feel like there is hope and that you can achieve your goals, whatever they may be. So if you can please leave a review, if you've gotten value out of the show and appreciate it, it would mean a lot to me. So on to today's episode. So about 90% of my clients, when they first start working with me, whether privately or in a group program like Truth with Food or Truth with Food Tapa Style, is they all think they have a willpower problem, that something's wrong with them. And obviously through our work together, they come to see things very differently. But what they're talking about in terms of willpower is often what I hear when I do speaking engagements, when I give workshops. It's the most common thing, I think, myth or belief that people have about themselves. And however, the work that has to be done to have a truce with food, a freedom around food, it does require discipline, which is a bit different than willpower. But being healthy also requires the discipline to move your body, build resilience in your muscles, bones, and all your systems. And so I was thinking about this, and being a coach, or having coaching tendencies, because the work I do is much different than just regular coaching. But at the end of the day, I really care about how people define things and what we're talking about. And what I realized was when I was thinking about, you do need to move your body. Our human bodies are meant to move, and you do need to eat well. But food actually isn't as complicated once you understand the emotional component to it. And so I realized while working out recently that they both require discipline, working out and eating well, but different kinds of discipline. And yet if we apply the same kind of discipline with working out that we do with food, we actually end up rewarding ourselves with food for working out. So, and if we push through our hunger often, as we think about pushing through a workout, we rebound eating more because you can't push through actual hunger. If your body's malnourished, you're gonna end up finding food. So I want to break down in this mini-sode today the different disciplines required to be consistent with moving your body and also with food, because they're different. And I know I'm calling this willpower, but willpower is a finite source, and discipline to me is a better representation of what we actually need, and I think even more than what people think of with discipline, I want you to replace the discipline word with devotion. And I like that word devotion over discipline because it requires a commitment and a seeing things through the rough and through the good and the ups and the downs, which you were all going to have. So we call it willpower, which is what the episode is called and what you have an emotional charge around. Yet what we're really talking about here is devotion, and how do I stay consistent with both of these? And so as far as working out, I'm going to give you my own personal example because this is kind of what started my thinking on this. And so if you've listened to the podcast for a year and a half or almost 2 years now, I eat really well now, and it's just part of a regular part of my life. I don't even over focus on food or anything. However, since I've realized that working out doesn't help you lose weight, and I'm not trying to lose weight anymore, but I realized that the benefits of working out, I'm not driven by the same fear that I used to be, in a nutshell is what I'm trying to say. And so one of the things I've realized is it's a lot easier for me to just skip working out in favor of working or, doing something else like reading, doing the things I love. And so for a while, I have been active enough, but really I felt like my conditioning was atrophying. I was getting really winded, like when Carlos and I would go walk in the park. And I knew part of it was the humidity and the air pollution here in Pittsburgh, but my conditioning was getting atrophying, and I was also getting really bored, which usually means that I'm not challenging myself enough. For me, that's what boredom usually means, or I need to mix it up. So I started to work out again more intensely than just the casual working out that I'd been doing. And I started this about 6 weeks ago. And for me, because I know myself well, I wanted to go to group classes since I work alone so much and really enjoy being social. Plus, I love the gym. I feel like the gym, it doesn't matter who you are. There's just this great equalizer when you show up at the gym. Like everyone, it's tough for everyone. So no matter what your title in life, no matter what your race or your gender or your financial status, there's just this down to earthness I find at a gym that I really like. So I took this boxing class and boot camp classes at an intense gym that I was told had a community feel. So really wanting to kick it up. They call it elite training. And for me, it feels like elite training. I don't know if a super athlete would feel that way, but me as your average person definitely did. And so there was so much resistance that came up to this, especially the first month, when it was clear that my conditioning was really out of shape. Again, according to, if I don't like to compare myself to the average American because most Americans on average are on their way to dis-ease. That's the truth. And so, my blood work is great. I'm not on any medications. I feel relatively healthy and enjoy my life, but I felt really winded and out of shape. So the first month was pretty awful and I couldn't keep up. I couldn't do a complete class without stopping. I had one of the trainers call me out, literally. I know he was trying to be all trainery and like push yourself, but I was like, my heart is racing so fast. Like if I had a heart rate monitor on, I probably would be like in the danger zone. And then I took this one boot camp class and we were supposed to do like 40 moves before of these like crunchers before we moved on to the next one. You put your feet in these like TRX bands and then you were like in a push-up position. We were supposed to do like 40 of them and I couldn't even do 3 of them. Right. So the judgment around myself kicked in, which it always does when we feel safe or vulnerable. So it's, I had these like repetitive obsessive thoughts, which when I know they're repetitive obsessive, I know that it's not the thoughts themselves that I need to take at face value. It's a sign that I feel really emotionally vulnerable. And this is one of the things I teach my clients about is that we don't need to analyze those thoughts of like, I was thinking, God, Allie, what took you so long to get to start training hard again? Why did you do this? It's going to be such a long road back to when you were in peak shape like 5 years ago. And so when I know that kind of judgment comes on myself, I know that I'm feeling unsafe. And in this case, I was feeling really weak, right? I could only do 3 of these moves when we had to do 40. And I was really out of shape compared to everyone else. So in other words, that makes me feel unsafe. And if we look at evolution, weak people got left behind, right? Or didn't survive. And so I was able to remind myself and during the workout that, I'm not in a nomadic tribe that's going to leave me and that we have modern medicine. So, that's kind of a reminder of like, okay, my thoughts aren't matching the current evolution and current state of life. And so I've always, and I reminded myself that I've always gotten the best results when I keep my eyes on my own paper versus comparing myself to other people, right? These people were clearly in better shape because they'd been showing up more often than I had. And that's normal. That's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm like this horrible, bad person that can't recover from not working out really hardcore for several years. And I reminded myself that my own goal the first month was just to show up and keep going. So if I knew I could work through the lack of conditioning and struggle the first month, I'd get more results back than when I put into the workout. So in other words, like I knew the first month I was going to feel really frustrated. I was going to feel really out of shape and I was going to be exhausted and sore. And for me and my body, I don't start to really see any difference in my clothes for like a month. Like my pattern is just slow and steady, like in terms of things. Like I don't gain weight now that I've normalized my metabolism, I'm not on an on-off eating, that my health is consistent. All of my healthy efforts are consistent from sleep to all that stuff. I've discovered my natural body rhythm is like, I don't really gain weight that much. I don't really lose weight that much. That's just kind of my cycle. Everyone's different. And so during this first month, our trainers were really pushing us. Like I said, the one time that trainer called me out for like not getting down and doing sit-ups when I felt like I had to bring my heart rate down before I lied down on the ground. And I felt so much resistance that first month. I was irritated at the trainers. I was irritated at myself. Again, all that obsessive thinking that happens when we feel unsafe. But I have enough self-awareness now that I recognize this resistance because this resistance was because I hate trying and failing. Failing here was being behind everyone else, not being able to get even close to the amount of reps. It was not being where I knew I used to be. I used to be in really great shape. And I'm not talking about like my clothes still fit, but I mean like I could finish workouts and I didn't think anything of it. Like I was just really in shape. So I'm great at trying and doing things I know I'm good at, like a lot of my clients are. And I'm assuming a lot of you guys as listeners are, which is why I bring this up. But I'm not so great at trying stuff that I struggle with, right? And lots of my clients find this too. So think about it for yourself. Like, do you kind of stick to what you know you're good at? And you like tell yourself you don't like other things, but often it's because you would have to be a beginner. So the discipline here with working out is to push yourself out of your comfort zone in the classical sense, but just beyond your comfort zone and not trying to like crush it. And I put crush it in quotes. So I loved Elizabeth Cronies McLaughlin, where episode, I believe it was 81, The Body's Rise of the New Heroine. She gave this, like, I think in really succinct words about how her trainer was really good with pushing her just beyond her muscles failure zone, so it created resilience, but not failure. So, what I want to say here is we do have to push ourselves with devotion, with willpower, with discipline, when we're working out just beyond our comfort zone, just what our mind tells us, I can only hold plank. I can't hold plank any longer. And you're like, you can do 3 more seconds, right? If you're doing yoga, it could be about forcing concentrating on the exact alignment versus using your ego to get in the pose, but holding that alignment a little bit more, a couple more breaths than you think you can. With my boxing class, it was going a bit faster and longer than I thought I could. I was getting so winded and I was like, you can do 3 more punches. And I could, right? With weights, it's maybe pushing through a couple more extra reps. So there's a pushing through your limits and having the discipline to prioritize working out rather than thinking, how much extra work you could get done or, putting off for a million reasons. So we are meant to move. If you think back to the 2 basic stress responses, famine or saber-toothed tiger, both involved moving to let the adrenaline and cortisol release. So you need to get that out of your system, whether it's from sitting in traffic and stressing out about traffic, feeling like shit when you're scrolling through social media, or having a really tough day parenting. It doesn't mean that you need to go on to a full workout like I was describing my resistance was around, but it can be stretching and dancing in your room. But you have to do it even when you don't feel like it. Like I don't really ever still, even though I'm like 6 weeks in and I'm starting to get the results and I'm feeling better, like I still think to myself, should I go? But like that's what you have to push through. When people are talking about pushing through and willpower and discipline and devotion with working out, you have to do that. Get yourself a little bit past your comfort zone. So that is discipline for working out. When you don't feel like it, go, you have to go. And that doesn't mean if you're exhausted, right? And maybe it's better to take a nap. I mean, like, if you really need to move, you need to go, even if you don't feel like it. And then it's pushing beyond what your thoughts tell you can handle and just a bit beyond, nothing more. If you are new to understanding your own resistance when you feel emotionally vulnerable or unsafe, for you, it might be, recognizing that those really judgmental thoughts that I was having aren't really about the judgmental thoughts. It's just you're feeling unsafe and you have to stick with it and stick in the vulnerability of, stay in the class, keep showing up, even if you're the one who's last to finish like I am. And, it's okay, let me come back to my center and figure out how can I improve from where I am, not the person next to me. So that is what that involves. And just a little tip that I discovered several years ago when I was like, I'm too tired to work out. I realized that I actually wasn't tired. I was stagnant. And so I'd been stagnant from sitting all day. And so if I just started moving, I started to wake up more. So for those people who need the discipline to push and go when they're not feeling like it, they think they're too tired, ask yourself if you're really just stagnant and you need to just get the energy flowing. So now let's move on to willpower / discipline, which is really devotion, because devotion says I'm going to devote myself to this through the ups and downs. Whereas willpower is more like a daily, like, do I have it or not? Right? It's a very all or nothing decision where devotion sticks with it for the ride. But with food, this requires a completely different kind of devotional discipline. So with food and what people often refer to as staying on track or being good, that's what I want to talk about, what kind of discipline you need there. And I'm going to use discipline, and I shouldn't use discipline and devotion interchangeably because they're different, but most people are coming from this from a discipline perspective. So we'll use discipline. So first of all, we have to talk about there's 2 different hungers. There is physical hunger. So if you're hungry, you have to eat. If you're hangry, you have to eat. Most people are overfed yet malnourished. So you really have to figure out what foods work best for you. If you try to override and push through physical hunger, it will always come back to bite you in the ass. Pushing past genuine hunger is not willpower. It's not discipline. It's insanity, okay? So you're not pushing yourself. You're sabotaging yourself. The body needs nutrition. It may not need all the calories, but it needs nutrition. And if you're hungry or hangry, it's not getting the nutrition it needs. If you're eating the wrong foods or wrong combinations of foods for you, you will continue to be physically hungry, which just stresses the body and then convinces you you don't have the discipline. Many people can't locate their hunger. And a lot of my clients are shocked. They're like, wow, I've been dieting. I've been trying this. I've been obsessing about food, but I can't actually locate my hunger in my body. And part of this is because we live in our heads. Part of it's because people don't tell you that your hunger shows up in terms of your energy levels, your moods. People tend to tell you just to check in with your stomach, but that's fullness. That's not necessarily hunger. So if this is you, start here. I can't emphasize this enough. It's hard to have discipline to do anything if your basic bodily needs aren't met. In fact, a lot of my clients start to realize that they start thinking about food when they're feeling the vulnerability of depletion. And that depletion is from, not taking the time to eat, from not eating. So like if your body's basic needs aren't being met, you aren't going to have any energy for discipline. So do the work to figure out the baseline of what kind of diet, like vegetarian, Mediterranean, or paleo, works best for your body. And again, if you go to alishapiro.com, you can get a breakfast experiment to see where you fall on that continuum, because there isn't one diet that works best for everyone. So now in terms of the discipline about staying on track or being good, first of all, it's surrendering. This is not when it's physical hunger. This is when I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I am. It's I'm not hungry. Why am I doing this? That eating. So first of all, it's surrendering that half your battle with food has nothing to do with food. I can't tell you how many people would rather try a new elimination diet or try a new plan or, tell themselves that they're eating well when they know they're not, or they don't want to look at it because they don't want to face the emotional piece to this. I think it is challenging work, but you can do it. It's no more challenging than staying in this vicious cycle of battling food. And if you want things to be different, you have to do things differently. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I have a lot of compassion because change is hard. I think that's why I'm in this business, in this line of work. Now that I understand health and my own patterns, I realize what I'm helping people do is change. I am really great at helping other people change, but it's also because I'm always learning it for myself. So the discipline involved in changing and figuring out the emotions side of eating is there's a discipline here to be open to a curiosity that maybe you don't love food as much as you think you do. And I get this is hard because this is a belief just like if you're, I can think of politically right now because it's such a charged time. If you're a Democrat and you hear Republican people speaking, especially on certain topics, it can be so easy to just dismiss everything they're saying because you bring this like, ugh. Or if you're a Republican, I'm so sick of hearing libtards. I didn't even know that was a word, but like liberals it's like liberal plus retarded or something. It's like just dismissing liberals because they're quote liberals or Democrats, right? Whenever an identity is threatened, even if we don't know the identity that we feel is being threatened, we tend to bring a judgment or certainty to areas we feel vulnerable around because we're not as confident opening up ourselves when we feel uncertain. That feels unsafe, right? The irony is we have these identities that we depend on so that we can feel certain in the world. We can feel grounded in the world. And so to lose those and then open up and maybe consider that, hey, I don't love food as much as I think I do, or I'm not a foodie, or what if I'm not the sweets girl? That was one of my clients. I remember she's like, no, everyone knows me as the sweets girl or knows me as the person always trying to diet, right? It's like pouring salt on a wound if we're going to question those identities. However, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are that you get that food is an emotional component too. So I might be preaching to the choir and you might be saying, all right, Allie, move on with it. But if you're still not convinced, that's cool. I get it. I spent 18 years thinking it was about the food too. So I understand. It was only pure exhaustion that I gave up, thinking it was just about the food. So the discipline here is learning self-awareness about why we're turning to food. And again, that involves an openness. It involves uncertainty. And I want to say this because people might think, oh, self-awareness doesn't sound so hard. But many people are critical of themselves. They aren't self-aware, but they're self-critical. And there's a big difference. So like many of my clients can read a room and manage their image. They're like, oh, I have emotional intelligence. I get this. I know how high to jump. I know what I need to do. Right. And I think a lot of women have learned to do that because you've had to. But what's challenging here and where the judgment comes in and self-awareness is lacking is they are not so much aware of their own pattern and how they're seeing food, how they're seeing stress, and they're seeing reality. So they can kind of think they know what everyone else is thinking, which once we do work together, they realize, oh, wow, I didn't know as much and I was making life a lot harder for myself. But we have to have the discipline to be self-aware. And that can also include, owning things about ourselves that aren't super sexy or that we want to admit about ourselves. One of the things is I'm really open and compassionate when people are trying. When I feel like people aren't open-minded and don't want to try or just are convinced that they're right and everyone else's way is wrong, I get really judgmental of them, right? I'm doing basically to them what I'm mad that they're doing to the issue or the idea. That's not lost on me. I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole, but I'm just trying to say self-awareness isn't just, oh, my Myers-Briggs type is ENFP, or, oh, I'm a Capricorn, or I'm a Libra. This is understanding our patterns in the moment and how we're taking in reality. So when I'm talking about the discipline of self-awareness, I'm talking about the lens or the filter you bring to the world. We all have filters, kind of like Instagram filters, that determine what we look at and what that means. So if you think of those Instagram filters, if you're on Instagram, you can adjust the lighting. And based on the lighting, you could have the same exact words and it can mean, and the feel could be very different, right? It could feel positive versus negative versus reflective versus soulful. And the same thing is true with data that we hear and data that we see. We can all see similar information, but we're all taking it in from a feeling perspective differently. And we have to have the discipline to figure out what our filter of the world means. So and I want to kind of make this filter idea very concrete. So take the scale, for example. For many people who struggle with food and their bodies, the scale means it determines their worth for the day and their worth in their life. And it determines the chances they're going to take or the lack thereof that they take in life. Many people are waiting on weight loss to unveil the real them, right? So the scale takes on this meaning of power. It really determines moods. It determines what I think my worth is. So that's what it means to some people. I work with my clients, and this is over time, this doesn't happen overnight, to make the scale be a piece of data that doesn't say anything about them inherently as a person. Rather, it is a reflection of information about the goals they're trying to obtain. If weight loss is a goal, I don't promise weight loss. I don't work on weight loss. Often it's a side effect. Sometimes it's not. But the point is that for many people, weighing themselves doesn't actually help them. It makes things worse. And so I want them to start to see the scale as, when is it useful for me to use? And how is it giving me information about what's working for myself and what's not, and what really moves the needle for me? So we're changing the meaning of the scale for them, right? It's no longer holding all the power. They're taking their power back over time. For me at this stage, the scale I use once or twice a year just to check in to make sure I'm maintaining muscle mass. I'm over 35. I'll be 39 on October 1st. And I can tell my muscles don't respond the same way anymore. Part of why I started getting into this boxing class, because I was like, oh my God, if I don't nip this in the bud now, I'm going to be losing more and more muscle mass. And I also use the scale to make sure my portions are in check. I can eat as much as Carlos, and sometimes I do. And I'm like, but he's a dude, so I should probably pay attention and cut back a little. But because I don't count calories, or food is just so much in the background of my life right now, I use the scale as a twice a year check-in just to make sure that I'm not doing that general creep that happens to us as we start to get less active and lose muscle mass. So that's one example of the filter we bring to the world on something like a scale. But, I was kind of using a political example earlier. We can take a look at the election. And now not all of us saw the same data, but everyone heard Donald Trump admit he was a sexual predator on the Hollywood Access tape, right? Everyone heard that. Yet some people reacted and they were able to dismiss it because they said that all men talk like that in the locker room. So this data confirmed their existing worldview of what men are like, or some men are like, Many of this, the tape just added to the disgust of what we already thought about him, right? So it just confirmed to us, oh, he's exactly who we thought he was. And for some people, it was a piece of data that pushed them over the edge of not voting for him and saying, okay, enough is enough. My point in saying all of this is that we all heard the same data, but based on who we are, based on our own self-awareness and the lens that we brought to the world, we filtered that differently. And so I'm talking about the discipline related to food to become self-aware. The kind of self-awareness I cultivate with my client requires first surrendering to our emotions. And this is the opposite of pushing through with what we want to do with exercise. Surrendering is staying with the discomfort. It's not wishing things were different. It's saying, this is how I'm feeling, versus jumping into our heads to analyze what's happening or saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Oh my God, there was so much going on in the world. How am I upset over this, right? That's trying to rationalize away our emotions. But what we embrace dissolves. So, for example, many people can relate to finding themselves mindlessly eating like bread and cheese or cookies. And rather than saying to yourself, what the hell are you doing? You know you shouldn't be doing this, right? It's saying, there's something I'm feeling that feels vulnerable to me right now. What am I feeling? Where am I feeling emotionally unsafe? What chronic stress or recent experience is making me feel really unsettled? So rather than listening to the judgment, analyzing the food more, it's sinking down into your body and saying, wow, just acknowledging I'm feeling really emotionally vulnerable right now. I use the word unsafe because food particularly is about lack of safety. There's many ways to feel vulnerable, but food specifically is when our emotional safety, physical safety, etc., is at risk. And that can be physical safety from being depleted and not getting the right foods for our body. So don't think my clients tend to be all or nothing thinkers. So they think emotionally unsafe means being held up at gunpoint at night or, something like that, which that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how our body registers lack of safety. So this asking and staying with ourselves, and again, here are some questions to ask yourself is when you start finding yourself mindlessly eating, whether you're in the middle of it or whether you catch yourself afterwards, because it's really hard. One of the metrics we use in Truth with Food is, are you catching yourself quicker and quicker, recognizing that you're emotionally unsafe? So oftentimes people don't really know what's happening until they try this a couple of times, which is another point of my discipline around food that I'll get to in a second here. But when you're making choices that you don't want to be making, I call them unaligned, whether it's you think, no, I just really love food because it tastes good, even though I know this is sabotaging my goals or whatever. Whatever you tell yourself, there's noble resistance as much as judgmental resistance. So that's where it gets really tricky and really matrixy. But where am I feeling emotionally unsafe is the question you want to ask yourself. What chronic stress am I been under that maybe is coming to a head that has dipped me to that depletion line with it? Or what recent experience is making me feel really unsettled? Like what just happened? Did I just get off the phone with someone and, now I'm unsure about something? Or did I just send off an email and I don't know how someone's going to respond? Where am I feeling emotionally unsafe? Now, this is deceptively simple, hard, and takes practice, right? Simple doesn't mean easy. In fact, a lot of my clients will say, oh my God, it's so simple that I don't sometimes trust it. But like clockwork, once I have the tools, I know exactly what's happening. So it requires not jumping to conclusions, right? Not convincing yourself you really love food, which is a conclusion. That's not helpful. And people always ask me, well, why do we do these things if it's unhelpful? And we know it isn't helpful and I always say it's because it's familiar. And when we feel vulnerable, familiar, even if it doesn't help, is like an anchor. It's a bone. Someone threw us a bone of safety. And that's what the sides of ourselves that feel really vulnerable are always looking for. And so it's really the discipline with eating to be with imperfection, which feels really messy and uncomfortable because we wonder, will this last? Will this lead to anything? Am I just going to keep eating? Am I, all this stuff. We all have these different thoughts if we really just stay with our emotions. And that's the kind of discipline required with food. It's not resisting food. It's embracing your, quote, bad habits, which are really protective, and doing the work to become the person who doesn't need to resist food. And so to become the person that doesn't need to resist food, the emphasis is on cultivating your power, your resilience, your agency, not giving it to the food, right? And so this, again, involves staying with your feelings and getting curious. I've had a ton of clients on now. We'll continue to have clients on, and you will hear they will all say, yeah, I'm just curious. I've learned I have to be curious. But that being curious is a superpower. It's saying, I'm not sure right now, which feels vulnerable. So props to my clients for being pretty badass, and props to you for listening who are going to try this out. So no, pushing away emotions too is when you start to jump into your head and chase the obsessive thoughts and try to overanalyze the situation. So retreating to your head as a way of distracting you from uncomfortable sensations, which are emotions in your body, is really important to realize. And this is when taking a few deep breaths is really helpful to get back into your body, take them from the diaphragm, cool the amygdala off, which is the amygdala is the fight or flight, which sends us just to uncomfortable bodily sensations. Often we're not even thinking, we just find ourselves with the food or the drink. And so staying with the emotion until you get the insight, that is the really big piece to this. You can't think your way out of it. The emotion will reveal what you need to know. And so the first couple of times you do this, you might not be able to identify the emotions you're feeling beyond good or bad. It often takes my clients a couple months, believe it or not, of working on this intensely. So like I said, another discipline piece to this is patience, of developing a new skill set. It's a very new skill set. And we're not taught this in school, right? So it's also the discipline to be a beginner, which stirs up its own emotions. So if you're listening to this, you might be like, why does anyone do this? Because it's so liberating and it's the best feeling in the world. So staying with your emotions and examining them is challenging, but it's totally worth it because it leads to one of the best feelings in the world, which is freedom. As one of my clients recently said on the webinar I recently hosted, she said, it's the most uncomfortable, freeing feeling. And those clients who were on the call and had worked with me started laughing because it sounds like it doesn't make any sense. But when you can be with things that are uncomfortable, you're no longer controlled by them. You're no longer hooked. And so with food, it's the discipline to stay with those moments when you're triggered and to eat unaligned with your goals. Or if you find yourself eating what you don't want to be eating, going back and asking what made you feel unsafe or vulnerable earlier. And you can do this right now. I can look back on especially when I was in the corporate career, I didn't have language. I didn't know what it was because I still thought it was food. But what was happening is I felt really unsatisfied in my career. And so on a daily basis, it felt really unfulfilling. And what made me feel really unsafe was I was like, is this going to be forever? Like, is this just going to change? Like, when are things going to change? And so it was actually the status quo that was making me feel really unsafe. And I wish I could have identified that because I could have interrupted that pattern and done things differently and saved a lot of time. And I love efficiency, but I didn't know. And it took me a lot longer to figure out. So please don't waste time like I did. Another tip, if you're just getting started with this, I highly recommend when you're trying to do this, even if you find yourself going automatically to the cheese and crackers or to the chocolate, whatever it is, even if you can stay with the emotion one more minute before you start eating, that will help you start to build resilience to stay with the emotions. And the longer you stay, the more insight you will gain. And then the more insight, the more you recognize what's happening. But all of this stuff of understanding what's happening, what the root source of it is, starts with the discipline of staying and embracing your emotional discomfort. This discomfort will show up in your body often before you have verbal language for it. It's a throat tightening. It's a stomach in knots. It's your chest shrinking. And so no matter how far we are on the path of our own truths with food and emotional awareness, we always have to return here. And it can get easier simply because we know we've been here before. We have a stronger sense of ourself. So the emotions may be the same intensity, but we feel a lot bigger in our power. So contextually, the emotions feel smaller and we feel more capable in handling them. And there's also a knowing, a self-trust that we can get through this rather than eat, which tells our bodies and ourselves that we can handle what's happening. When we go to eat, we tell ourselves we can't handle what happened, and our resilience atrophies. So I hope this describes in clarity, gives you some clarity between the difference between discipline with movement and eating. With movement, you want to push yourself out of your comfort zone into discomfort just beyond what you think you can handle physically. With eating, you want to embrace the present discomfort until you get the clarity, which feels like comfort of knowing what's happening. There's a lot of relief in being able to identify or make the connection. This is why I'm eating. I can't tell you how much my clients find this so life-changing because it challenges that identity that they love food and that they have to be obsessed with food and think about it and build it up in their lives. And the more they do this, the more freedom they want. It's like being able to breathe more and more. So you don't want to push through your emotions around food. You want to stay with them. Both disciplines will be uncomfortable, which is why you need to think more in terms of devotion. Because like I said, I said it on the webinar, I love that America is a super optimistic country, but a shadow side to that is anytime we're not happy and thinking positive, we think we're doing something wrong. So we've gotten really bad at discomfort, which ironically makes us less unhappy because we can't feel joy and happiness as much. So both of these devotions, these disciplines will be uncomfortable, but you can definitely handle both sources of discomfort. In fact, like many of my clients, you start to feel pretty badass with discomfort, especially when you're amazed and surprised that your filter is faulty, right? This filter you bring to the world has definite blind spots. All of ours does. And if someone tells you that it doesn't, that's the biggest message that they're crazy. But your filter is faulty, and life is better and more exciting than it appears. It's also a lot less stress-feel, often in our own internal sense of things. It doesn't mean the world outside isn't crazy. I think it's clear that I believe things are wild out there and more stressful. And I think they're actually going to get a lot worse before they get better, which means if you can build your resilience around food, you're going to build your resilience for the stress that's in life. Both types of discipline will make you stronger and more confident. Same end result, but different routes to get there. So that was my mini-sode. I think it might have been a half hour, maybe not so mini, but let me know what you think on Instagram or Facebook. Or of course, you can email me at allie@allieshapiro.com. And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, will you please pass on the podcast? So many of you are so great about telling your friends and family and colleagues that you work with about the podcast. And that means so much to me. I want us to change the conversation so we can be more effective. I'm just, with a 95% failure rate of diets and increasing obesity and cancers and all this stuff, we need a giant shift in the conversation. So if you can pass this along to anyone who could benefit. And also, again, if you could please leave a review, I would really appreciate it. It helps the show so much, helps other people find it, and helps the show grow, which is necessary. So I hope you guys have a great end of September, and let's bring on the fourth quarter of the year. More resilient, more clear, and devoted to ourselves.
Have questions or reactions about the episode? Reach out to me on Instagram and Twitter at Allie M. Shapiro or Facebook at Facebook.com/Allie Marie Shapiro. And if you love the show, please leave an iTunes review and tell one friend this week about how to get the Insatiable podcast on their phone. See you on social media.